Well, hello. Welcome to Preparing for Menopause. So I'm Jennifer Harrington. I'll be with you today. I'm the clinical director and naturopath of Menopause Natural Solutions. I'm also an author, podcaster, and a perimenopausal woman myself. So as we go through, know that I'm going through this journey alongside with you, holding your hand. So what we're going to be covering today is what is menopause? What should we expect? And how can we best prepare for this time of life? So starting with what is menopause? So to answer that question, I'm going to explain a little bit more about the female hormone life cycle. So if we have a look at this graph, you'll see that as females, people born female have hormones. They just have smaller amounts and of different forms. And it's when we go through puberty that our ovaries get switched on. And it's the ovarian production of estrogen. So we had estrogen before, but we had smaller amounts. And it's through puberty that we start creating a different form and a different amount of estrogen. And most of you are aware that puberty had a beginning, a middle, and an end. You're not still going through puberty. It's over. It was over a long time ago. And that can be a tumultuous time. It can be a bit of a roller coaster for many kids. But once they're through it and you reach the fertile years, life tends to be a little bit calmer. It's a little bit of a smoother ride. I know it's not a smooth ride for all. I know there's many women that struggle and suffer also through the fertile years, but it's generally a calmer time than the transitions at either end. So then we get to perimenopause, and perimenopause really is the opposite of puberty. So instead of switching the ovaries on, the ovaries are moving into semi-retirement and then into full-time retirement. So for women, this can start at different stages. So if we're looking at textbook normal, it would be in their 40s. In my particular case, I first started noticing perimenopausal changes in my late 30s. But some women, it's even earlier than that. Late 30s, it's not uncommon, but 40s is generally when that starts to change. And in a moment, we'll go through what some of those first kind of changes are that you'd expect to see. But it is a time of change. And the only thing predictable is unpredictability, is that you don't know what's going to happen one day to the next. But it's a transition. It has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. So the changes that you're experiencing at the moment aren't lifelong. They're temporary. And I think that's something that women need to know. This isn't the beginning of the end. It is a transition. It is a closing of one chapter and an opening of a new chapter. And how exciting is that? An opening of a new chapter. So menopause itself is a line in the sand. It is to mark 12 months since your last menstrual period. There is no test that says, yep, you're menopausal, because we have such hormonal change in that 12 months beforehand that you might look like you're menopausal one day, and then the next day you might have some hormones. So it's really about that last menstrual period, and when is that 12-month date after that point in time. And then from then on in, postmenopause for the rest of your life. Now, postmenopause for the rest of your life doesn't mean no hormones for the rest of your life. Because remember, there are other parts of the body, like your adipose tissues, that can create hormones. So just as you were between birth and puberty, is how you're going to be from menopause to death. So when we go back to that birth to puberty, I want you to start thinking about what you were like as a little girl, what sort of symptoms, what sort of emotions. So when I think of my prepubescent self, I think of a cheeky little girl. I think of a curious, adventurous. I was very curious and very adventurous and very cheeky. They're definitely three that would describe me at that point in my life. So when we then think about postmenopause, these are the kind of qualities I want you expecting. I want to return to that cheeky, adventurous, curious little girl. She's coming back. So that's something for you to look forward to. The other thing I should let you know is when we're looking at the transition, just as we had puberty and then we had the more stable years, menopause is like that too, where perimenopause is the transition, it's the roller coaster ride. Postmenopause is that stable time afterwards. So yeah, it's just a different way of looking at it. It's the beginning of a new chapter. It's a new stage of your life, and it can be the best stage of your life, and it can also be the longest stage of your life. Now, looking at average life expectancies, if you go through puberty around the average age of 51, and the average life expectancy for women in Australia is around 84, that is the biggest chunk of life. So it can be the longest phase of your life, but life expectancy is changing. Like I'm expecting to well exceed 84. So it can even be half of my life depending on how long I live for. So I'm definitely doing everything possible to make sure that it is the best phase of my life. All right, so with perimenopause, what kind of symptoms would you expect to see with hormonal change? So a lot of women first notice things like their cycle change. It might be that it's not predictably landing at that stage where it's 28 days, 30 days, whatever your cycle is for you, that's not predictable anymore. It can be that the quality of the menstrual flow changes. So it might be heavier, it might be lighter, it might be longer, it might be clottier, it might be a slightly different color. You might find that you're spotting when you weren't spotting before. It's just those little changes that you might go, that's a bit weird. That can be the first sign and symptom that women notice. In my particular case, I'm just going to move on to symptoms. I've jumped. We'll go to symptoms and we'll come back. So in my particular case, it was actually night sweats and changes in my sleep that I noticed first. But no two symptomatic women are the same. I know that we hear a lot in the media about hot flushes, but that's actually not the number one symptom of menopause. The number one symptom that the majority of women experience is fatigue. So just keep that in mind, that you might have similar symptoms to some of your girlfriends, but the severity and also the combination of symptoms may be very different. And now the slide that I missed was just looking at, well, what are my chances? What should I expect? Should I expect doom and gloom, or should I expect a smooth ride? And I would not want you to expect doom and gloom. I would want you to set yourself up for the greatest chance of success. What I wanted to also enforce is that 20% of women going through the transition have no symptoms. None. The only thing they notice is that they're not menstruating anymore. How wonderful is that? And I think that's how the transition should be, that there's minimal changes except for the ending of the menstruation. Because the whole reason why we have the ovarian hormones in the first place is for fertility, is to conceive and to hold a pregnancy. I don't know about you, but I don't want a pregnancy in my 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. I'm happy for that to be done. And I'm happy to move on to the next chapter of my life, but I'm even happier if I can do that in a smooth transition. So that is possible. 20% of women, that is reality. But we also find, unfortunately, that 20% of women are at the other end, at the extreme end. They have all the symptoms and they have them quite intensely. And I really feel for these group of women. And it's not me, but if it was me, I would put my hand up and get help from everyone. I would be going and getting pharmaceutical help. I would be getting natural help. I'd be getting everything, because these women do not have a good quality of life. And the menopausal transition can take decades. So you really don't want to be having a poor quality of life for that long. So if you are struggling, reach out, get help. It doesn't need to be like this. But the rest of us are somewhere here in the middle. And I think by setting yourself up for success, setting yourself up for perimenopause can actually help you downgrade your symptoms. So instead of being extreme, you might move to moderate. Instead of being moderate, you might move to mild. Instead of mild, you might move to no symptoms. So I do think that what you do now makes a big difference with how you transition, and the easier you can transition, the better quality of life you're going to have, which is something that I want for everyone. But I also want to reinforce, excuse me, that the transitional symptoms are temporary. But remember, can be a decade, so don't stick your head in the sand and wait it out. So we have gone through some of the symptoms. Moving on, we're going to have a look at, well, how do I prepare? And it really starts with assessing your individual needs, because what you're going to need to do is going to be different from your sister or your best friend or the other women in your life. And I start with testing. I'm looking at general testing and I'm looking at specific testing, and we'll go through those in a moment. I'm also having a look at nutrition. How can we alter our diet so that we're better set up for success? I want to look at your lifestyle, and I want to have a look at your environment. So these are the four things that I do for preparation. So moving on to general testing. When did you last see your local doctor? When did you last have general testing? Because what you might not realize is that any undiagnosed or poorly treated conditions are going to make your transition harder, because this time of transition, this roller coaster ride, highlights concerns that you already have. So if you had pre-diabetes, there's a higher chance that this is going to turn into diabetes at this point. If you had thyroid dysfunction, it's a high probability that this will be enhanced during this time. So it's about finding the weakest links in your chain so we can strengthen them and support them so that you have a more easier transition. And some of the general testing can start with nutrition. Can look at, well, what are my vitamin D levels? What are my iron levels? B12. Some of these simple tests just to check, do I need to work on my nutritional status? I've already mentioned prediabetes and diabetes. That is a really common thing that we see during the menopausal transition. So just checking, am I pre-diabetic? Do I have good blood sugar levels? What's my insulin doing? Am I insulin resistant? Checking liver function, checking thyroid function, looking at inflammatory markers. Am I inflamed? And also looking at a full blood count, or parts of the world know it as a complete blood count. Do I have the right amount of red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets? What's happening with my blood? And this is where I start, and this is where I optimize, because the better you can get these markers done now, the sooner the better, no matter where you are. If you're if you're in the fertile stages, if you're in perimenopause, even if you're in menopause, these can all be optimized. But it's again looking at your individual test results. Then I move on and have a look at specific testing. So a lot of women have heard of estrogen, and there are many forms of estrogen. There's estrone, estriol, estradiol, but we also have the metabolites of these hormones. So when our body is trying to detoxify estrogen, it can go down the 2-hydroxyestrone pathway, the 4-hydroxyestrone pathway, the 16-hydroxyestrone pathway. We want to know which pathway your body prefers. The 2 is the preferred pathway. The 4 can be potentially carcinogenic, so we want to make sure that you don't have a preference for that pathway. And the 16 can be growth promoting. So if you struggled with things like fibroids or polyps or cysts, we want to make sure that you're not detoxifying your estrogen down that pathway, so that we can make sure that you're having a healthier estrogen detoxification and you're less likely to have growth-related problems in the future. For some women, we like to look at digestive health. Like if you know your digestion has been a problem, we have a thing called the microbiome. You've probably heard of this. It's just a collection of your microbes. And there's a subset of this called the estrobolome. And within the estrobolome, we have a thing called beta-glucuronorase. And anything that ends in an ase is an enzyme. So when we're trying to detoxify estrogen, we put a little tag on top just to say, this one's done, it's time to excrete it. But as it's going through the digestive system, if there's too much beta-glucuronorase, it's like a scissors, it cuts the tag off. So it no longer has the tag to be excreted and is recycled and gets to live another day. So in perimenopause, when your estrogen levels can be higher, we need to see whether beta-glucuronorase is playing a role here, because in this case, we need to work on the digestive health in order to balance your hormones and not work on your hormones directly. I hope that makes sense. It's looking at root causes, what's underlying what's going on. We need to have a look at heavy metal toxicity. So it's not necessarily that I was exposed to a heavy metal today. It could have been that I was exposed in my childhood, because your body is quite intelligent. If you've encountered a toxin, the body wants to get it out of the bloodstream as quickly as possible, and quite often it stores it so that it can process it later on. But, we're the lead generation. We grew up with lead in the paint, and I don't know about you, but I used to chew on little wooden blocks that were painted in lead-based paint. We had lead in our petrol, we had it in our paint in the house, and some of the signs of lead toxicity are the same as the menopausal transition. So these include things like joint pain, nausea, fatigue, brain fog, irritability, insomnia, and headaches. So we want to find the true root cause. Do we need to be looking for toxicity, and do we need to be looking at detoxing the body, or is this actually part of the hormonal change? That's just one example. There's so many different metals that are in our environment these days. We've got so much mercury in our seafood, also in our amalgam fillings. There's aluminium, so many other different ones. We also need to look at chemical contamination. We have things called xenoestrogens. So they're environmental estrogens that play a big role in estrogenic type growths. Perfumes, plastics, these all contain xenoestrogens, and most of us have them in our household. So we could all do with cleaning up the home. But we also have chemicals that are obesogens, and these are promoting weight gain. So are you gaining weight because of your chemical exposure or because of the hormonal change? We need to consider mold and mycotoxin exposure. Not for everyone, but for some people, if you know you've lived in a water-damaged house and you're having signs and symptoms, zearalenone, I call it Zera for short. It's an interesting name to try to pronounce. It is an estrogenic mycotoxin. So we certainly don't want to be exposed to that. So maybe part of your transition is going back and doing some mold detoxification. Maybe it's going through and checking your house for mold, or doing some cleaning up of the home, some renovation to get it out. For some women, I'm looking at cholesterol particle testing. Most people have heard of, actually, I've just seen the time. We will carry on. So we also look at bone density and sleep apnea in some individuals. So we're looking at what signs and symptoms you're displaying and what else could be going on for you. Because I want to get into how we actually prepare. So starting with testing, the next step is nutrition. So with nutrition, the number one thing is hydration. Are you actually drinking water? How much water are you drinking? And what is the quality of your water? Is it tap water? Is it filtered water? We do want to cut sugar because this is a big time of diabetes diagnosis. So I'm not talking about natural sugars. You can eat your fruits, you can have your salads, you can have your vegetables. It's the processed sugars that we want to cut out of the diet. I want to make sure you're eating adequate proteins. I want you to be removing all your dangerous inflammatory seed oils. These are your processed oils. I'm not talking about natural oils from your seafoods, from your olives, from your nuts, eggs. I'm talking about the processed oils. And are you eating phytoestrogenic type foods? Flaxseed's the first one that comes to mind, but a lot of your fruits and vegetables naturally contain phytoestrogens. What about lifestyle? What can I be doing in my life to help set up healthy habits to support me during the transition and beyond? Sleep. Sleep. Many women, not all, definitely not all, but many women notice changes in their sleep. So the better habits we can get involving sleep or bedtime routine, that is going to support us during the transition. So things like no blue lights, getting to bed at a decent time, having a wind down routine to help you get to sleep and stay asleep. And if you are having sleep issues, get on top of it. Sooner the better. We need sleep for healing, for recovery. It's so important also for brain health. Like, I don't know about you, but if I haven't slept well, I'm a little bit foggy the next morning and can also get some headaches. So sleep, make sure you're on top of it. If you're not, reach out, get some help. Muscle mass. One of my top tips for perimenopausal women is to get back to the gym and lift some weights. We need our muscle mass. When I think about a frail old woman, she has no muscle mass. So strong is the new sexy. So get to the gym, build some muscle, but it's not just about feeling strong and feeling toned. Muscle mass helps with blood sugar regulation. So it can also help to prevent blood sugar issues during the transition. We need to consider stress management. Our adrenal glands help produce estrogen after the ovaries have retired. So we want to make sure that our adrenal glands are as healthy as possible. So stress management exercise. It can be breathing exercises, time in nature, mindfulness, prayer, having a bath. There's so many different ways, but it's about finding out how you relax. Now, I've recently discovered Qigong and I love it. I love just to shake off my cares and concerns and start the day fresh. We also need to look at your toxic lifestyle habits. Are you smoking? Are you drinking? Can we stop them or can we, remove them so that we're not binging? And then we move into the environment. Now, unfortunately, we do live in a toxic soup. But what we can do is we can try and at least make our home environment that little less toxic. And like I've mentioned before with mold, if you're not sure, it's worth getting your house assessed just to see, is there mold? Is there water damage? Do you need to find a new home or do you need to renovate or are you fine? It's not a problem at the easy fix. Are you storing toxic metals? Can we do a test? to see if you're just storing metals, do we need to remove them? Same with chemical exposure. How can we clean up the environment, remove plastics and perfumes, and just see what else is lingering? So what's really, really important is air quality. And I hope you guys all have a quality air filter at home, and also water quality, which I've also already touched on. Do you have a good water filter? Is the water that you're drinking filtered, high quality water, or is it from a tap? Well, I hope you've enjoyed today. There's so many things you can do to prepare for an easier transition. I do think that prevention is far better than a cure. So set yourself up for success. And hopefully, you're one of those 20% that breeze through without a care in the world, or at least that you've moved down so that you're having milder symptoms than what you would have been if you didn't set yourself up. So I'm Jennifer Harrington. I'm podcast host of Menopause Natural Solutions podcast. I am the author of From Invisible to Invincible, the Natural Menopause Revolution book. I host webinars and group programs like today. But my key joy, what I love to do the most is one-on-one consultations. So if you would like a hand, someone to support you along the journey, I would love to be of assistance. And I do offer complimentary discovery calls. So if you'd like to get to know me, have a chat about your personal situation, I would be honored to meet you and have a chat. So I hope you've enjoyed today. Until next time, bye for now.